Hello, my name is Leora. I'm a part-time furniture flipper out of Windsor, Colorado. What started as a hobby in 2020 is now a full-blown obsession. I love taking old, unloved furniture and creating beautiful works of art. Come join me in my studio to see how I make diamonds from the rough. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. This week's piece is going to be a desk. I absolutely loved this desk. I found it on Facebook Marketplace. They didn't want anything for it. They just needed it out of their house. And when I looked through this, I did find a lot of damage and a lot of cool things. I'm not sure what that is. I found this lockbox and I really wanted to find out if there was something inside there. I found this canceled check from 1988, an old phone cord, and believe it or not, the key. And it actually worked. The previous owners didn't tell me much about the piece, so I Googled it and learned that it was originally from about 1910 and sold for nearly $1,600. Let's see if I can make a diamond from the rough. The first thing I'm going to do is give it a clean. So I'm going to have a bucket of water with some TSP, and then I'm going to remove the hardware and scrape off the extra old varnish on top. So sit back and watch me prep this piece. Because this finish was chipping off already, I decided to use a carbide scraper instead of sanding it or stripping it, and this really only took me a few minutes. Be sure you wear a mask so you don't inhale any of the dust from old finish. Next up was a good scrub with warm water and the TSP, and then I removed all the old hardware. I scrubbed the inside, the outside, and then of course label my drawers so I know where they go back. I am all about safety, so I wear hearing protection when I use the shop vac, and of course also when I'm using my sander. Which I did. A lot. I have a dilemma. This is a drawer that I spent quite a bit of time sanding on the inside, trying to get off the orange finish, like these. Very orange, and also to get out these stains from an ink pen, and it's still very visible. The maker's mark is also printed on the inside of a drawer. But then there's this guy, and I don't think any amount of sanding is going to fix it. The ink stains are a problem for another day, so I'm just going to start sanding the faces of the drawers. The finish there is alligatoring, looking like rough skin. To remove this alligatoring skin, I took an 80 grit sandpaper and wrapped it around my Surf Prep sander and then did all the different sides of the drawer boxes. Now we are at the sanded and washed stage, and what I have done here is added some wood fill to all of these spots on the legs that have been apparently chewed by a dog. So there's quite a bit here. This is Dixie mud. And the mud will dry in about an hour, and then I can sand it down, and I can shape that with a soft sanding pad. One big tip that I have is that if you're doing a restoration or flipping furniture is to change your perspective. Flipping this on its back gave me access to the knee hole, so I was able to scrape and sand this without having to do it over my head or side to side. And also gives you a chance to see if there's anything broken down here, get rid of any cobwebs, and now it is ready to go. The next repair is going to be this. I actually just popped this little piece off. It did break right there, but it was standing up like this. So it was already partially removed, but not quite. So I'm going to re-glue that and clamp it, and then I'm going to make a cast of this shape to complete this shape. So you can watch that next. I'm a big fan of the Titebond wood glue. This really makes an excellent bond, and it makes it very, very quickly. So you put a liberal amount on both sides, and then you just place the two pieces together. This little side chip came out as well, so I glued that on. And then you wipe away the excess with a damp cloth. Once that was all done, I used a couple of small clamps and put it on very gently, and then you wipe away the excess again, because once you get it tightened in there, it usually mushes out a bunch more glue. A few hours later, I removed the clamps and then I used a soft rad pad to sand around the edges of the leg. Now for something I've never done before. I used amazing mold putty from Alumilite to try and recreate the broken part of the leg. This two-part putty is formed by taking the two portions and mixing them together until it forms one solid color. It'll feel something like silly putty when it's ready to go. Once it's thoroughly mixed, place it over whatever you're trying to make a mold of and just wrap it all around. The putty should set up firm in about 20 minutes. Spoiler alert, this was an epic fail. But more on that later. For now, I'm going to use clear shellac over all the parts of the drawers that have anything that's going to potentially come through my new paint. That includes ink stains, as well as I wanted to protect this maker's mark so anyone will know where it came from. Here's my first clue that something wasn't quite right with the putty. This was supposed to just pop right off. Time to get into the pretty parts. This was my first time using Fusion Mineral Paint in the color Blue Pine. I also have a brand new brush called the Happy Creating Brush by Kristana. This soft bristled brush really put on the Fusion Mineral Paint so smoothly and so easily. I really loved the way it moved over the wood, and the paint had a lot of really good coverage even on the first coat. Another thing I really liked about this paint is the color Wet is also very similar to the color when it's dry. You can see on the right it's mostly dry and on the left it's wet, but it's really not a big difference. Let's get back to this dang leg. Here's take number 2. I remade the putty because it was on way too thick the first time. Yes, that is how it's supposed to pop off, and it's sort of holding the shape. I made the mold out of some 2-part fast casting resin, and yeah, it was all looking good for a minute, but just wait. At least watching it dry was pretty cool. Spoiler alert, this was an epic fail. The first cast I made came out so flat. It was nowhere near looking like the rest of the leg. The shape wasn't even right. Molding putty 2, artist 0. While I contemplated a solution to my molding problems, I tested out my first and second coat of paint with some water-based top coat. Fusion Mineral Paint is an all-in-one paint, meaning that it has primer built in as well as top coat, but I knew I was going to use a transfer later, and that means I'm going to use water-based top coat over the top of everything. You can see right there a little bit of tannins do pull through the Fusion Mineral Paint, so I went ahead and shellacked the whole thing. Now for leg repair attempt number 3. I made the putty again much thinner and put it around a rounder part of the leg, and that made a much better mold. My problem previously had been trying to fill the mold while it was on a flat surface, but epoxy is a chemical reaction, and when it gets hot, it made the mold go flat. So I held it in the palm of my hand, and it held a nice rounded shape. While the mold was still pretty soft, I used some scissors to trim any excess off, then used the wood glue and some tape to hold it in place while it dried. Success! And now I can finally get back to the fun part, which is putting color on the furniture. So sit back and enjoy this quick little color montage. Okay, so that leg repair wasn't perfect, but it was finally done. Next is the color Winchester by Fusion Mineral Paint. I'm a huge Supernatural fan, so of course I had to buy the color called Winchester. I wasn't sure if this was going to be quite dark enough to cover the stains. You can see it's kind of poking through, but a wonderful quote I just heard was, "The first coat is always a liar." So I'm ignoring the fact that it looks absolutely atrocious right now. I wanted the legs to stand out from the body, so they are also getting the Winchester treatment. I had the pleasure of working on this dresser for several hours today, uninterrupted, which rarely ever happens. So where we stand is a third coat on the body, a third coat on the underside where the knee hole is, 2 coats on the legs, and kind of deciding what to do with these drawers. So everything's been sanded, everything's been painted with multiple coats on the fronts, and still trying to decide how I wanted to handle the insides. Decided on the black because I just could not cover all of that black ink. Also had a couple of last minute repairs because while I was painting, I noticed there was a chip in this veneer. And this is the repaired leg. So there's the built up new portion, and added a little bit of mud fill to round out that last part. And tomorrow I will sand, give a third coat on the legs, and we'll be ready for the next steps. It's a lot of work, but it's all going to come together. It's looking good. One of my favorite combinations is stripes and florals, so I added a couple of stripes of painter's tape along each side of the desk, and I used the small piece of tape as a means of making it parallel so I would not start to have my stripes going sideways and crooked. It's tedious and it takes a long time, but it is totally worth it. Once your tape is on, you use some top coat to paint over the tape so that if anything's going to seep under, it will be a clear coat. For my stripes, I'm using the Wanderlust Metallics from Daydream Apothecary in their silver, which was great because it was nice and opaque. After the final coat of color, when I was satisfied, I peeled off the tape while the paint was still wet. You do not want to wait until it's completely dry to peel the tape because you will lose your crisp line. Once your paint has dried for 24 hours at least, you can put on a transfer. I'm using the Redesign with Prima Imperial Garden transfer, which is like a giant floral postcard. To apply the transfer, it's fairly simple, but you can still mess it up a million ways. First is, oops, I stuck it down when I wasn't ready, and it could have all been over right there. Once you peel the white backing, the entire transfer is basically adhesive. So any place you stick it to, it's going to stick, and if you rip it up too fast, you'll just destroy the transfer. It can also roll up on itself, which I have done, and then you've lost the entire thing. To apply it to where you actually want it to be, you use the little brown stick that comes in the package. You could use a credit card, there's also a tool, but the stick works fine. And you just rub over the transfer and peel gently once you see that the transfer has adhered to your surface. Okay, so here's where it gets a little more interesting. You do not have to use it as the package shows. This desk was a little shorter than the image, so I just cut off the part that I wanted, and then I have the rest of the bottom to use anywhere I want. I could split it up, or I could keep just the words, or I could just cut out the florals. And voila, the whole thing is on. Now for burnishing. This is a gentle burnishing pad, so it's not quite a sandpaper, but it does have a little bit of abrasiveness. And you just want to rub over the whole transfer with your fingers and then that abrasive pad to push out any bubbles. Now it's back to the drudge work. I've already done some pretty things, so now I have to go back to working on the things that just make it work better. First, I had to sand down all of the wooden tracks. Since these are wood-on-wood glides that are about 100 years old, I sanded them with a rough sandpaper, then a light sandpaper, then dusted it all out, and then I'm going to use a furniture tonic to moisturize the wood. This is a product made by Wise Owl, and it can be used on just about anything, from leather to wood to painted surfaces to headlights. Now that I've done all the work to get the transfer onto the top and I've burnished it down with a burnishing pad, there are no bubbles in here, it's smooth, and now I need to protect it. The paint has a built-in primer, but if you put on a transfer, you always have to cover it with another wax or a top coat of some kind to make sure that this doesn't get scratched off. So what I'm going to do, because this is a work surface that's going to have a lot of activity on it, is I'm going to use the gator hide from Dixie Belle. This is their strongest top coat, but gator hide and transfers don't always work well together. So before I put the gator hide on, I'm going to put on Dixie Belle clear coat in satin. That's going to give me a similar sheen to what I already have. This is a little bit more matte, but it's going to be fine. I'm actually going to be covering everything probably with a little bit of this because there are going to be transfers and other paints on the side, so everything's going to have a little bit of top coat. So I'm matching the sheens, and I'm going to put this on with a sponge. The sponge, which is also from Dixie Belle, but you can get it anywhere. You want to get it wet first because you don't want it to suck up all of this top coat into the sponge on the inside, so you get a little bit of water in here first. I don't want to pick up any color into my container, so I'm going to pour the top coat out so that I'm not dipping my sponge inside the container over and over again. Just pour a little bit on my plate. You can put it on a bowl. It's rather thick and gelatinous looking. Kind of looks like a pudding. It is water-based, but it is quite thick. So when you're putting this on, I always forget. I like to wear a glove when I'm using top coat because I will end up with a clear glove of just hard top coat on my hands and my fingernails, and I do not like that. So you get a little bit on the sponge, wipe off the excess, and then in long strokes, starting from one end, gently go across, going along with your wood grain. You do not want to overwork top coat. Slightly overlapping the first stroke, you're going to do the next. Make sure it's not pooling at the end where you come off. If you get any drips in your top coat, they will be there when they dry. They will just dry in a visible droplet. So notice I'm not going like this ever. It's all going to be back and forth, back and forth. While I wait for the top to dry, I need to do something with this area here. Because the desk could be up against the wall, or it could be out in the middle of a room where this is the first thing you see, I cannot leave this just blank. So my thoughts are, first and foremost, to use what I already cut off of this top image, so it can have a little bit of a continuation of the exact same theme. And then I went and grabbed a few other redesigned with Prima transfers and just chose some other ones that had blooms that were a similar size and scale. So I have a million flowers, but they had to be big flowers so that it didn't look weird with this as the main image. So now I have to design. Okay, I've got a red, 2 pinks, purple, blue. I've got all those colors. This looks like it's going to fit in the color range, so yay. And now to apply. For this part of the process, I'm not just going to take the blooms and stick them down one at a time. I need to layer them to figure out the design that's going to look best. There's no way I'm going to try to put these transfers on vertically because there's just too many of them. So I went ahead and flipped it over onto its face. And actually what I did was drop it on its face. So I'm really glad that I put this blanket down, and I will see the damage when I pick it back up. Hopefully there is none. Kind of wish I'd cut it on tape. Kind of glad I didn't. You'll see here that I layered each of the blooms and stems and words in the order in which I wanted to put it down. Then I just taped them all in place so I'd have a layout, and then I peel them back and go to the lowest level and stick that on. All told, putting on the transfers all over this piece took probably about 2 hours, so I have speeded it up drastically. That includes all the design phase as well as the actual labor of putting it on and buffing it out. Off camera, I did another preparation step, which was to moisturize the insides of the drawer with some more Wise Owl furniture salve. And now I am using just a freehand makeup brush technique to put on some silver accents around the legs. The next big detail is going to be on the fronts of the drawers. This is a redesign with Prima product. It's called a stick and style stencil. To use this is very, very easy. I love these products because this makes stenciling absolutely flawless. You just measure out the amount that you want, cut it off with scissors, and this is reusable as many times as you can continue to make it stick down because it's adhesive on the back side. So when you stick it down, you just rub it down with your hand and then no paint seeps underneath, and you have an absolutely perfect stencil no matter how you apply it. There's a dozen different ways you could apply paint through a stencil, but one of the most effective ways is to use a roller with very little paint and just roll it on after offloading the excess. This is the hardware that I plan to use. I picked this up at Home Goods and it was pretty inexpensive, but it was absolutely perfect for the project. However, I didn't like the yellow gold, so I'm just using some silver spray paint I got at Home Depot and changing the color. Here we are the next morning, and you can see that my stencil is nice and dry. Next thing I'm going to do is give it a little bit of a light sand, knock down any high points, and then I'm going to seal it. To seal the drawers, I used my top coat, but I'm going to do some detail work in these grooves on the side, so I'm using a clear wax to seal first. You just have to put it on and then clean up any little blobs because those will solidify. I'll tell you more about why I used a clear wax first in a little bit, but before that I wanted to pull off these metal tabs on the feet because one was missing, and also every one of those things is just waiting to scratch up your floor. To remove old feet, all you have to do is take the corner of a chisel or a flathead screwdriver and tap it in gently and it'll pop right off. I'm replacing those metal feet with these felt pads, so you can get those in bulk at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and you'll want to choose a pad that is the same diameter or slightly smaller than the leg that you are covering. Now all that's left is the detail work. I touched up a little silver paint around the legs and added some brown gilding wax into all of the grooves on the side of the desk. Adding a dark wax at the end is the best way to bring out the details. For a little shimmer, I'm adding this decor wax from Redesign with Prima in Sarah Blue, and it's an iridescent, barely there hint of color that will catch the light. Of course, I can't leave any wax wadded up into the details, so I have to use a dry brush to gently wipe away anything that looks like it might dry clumpy. Finally, I add the hardware, and then it is time to put it all back together. The very last thing I had to do was make those legs stand out. I used Dixie Shine to bring a little bit of sparkle to this project. First, you add a little bit of adhesive to wherever you want it to stick, and then you unroll the Dixie Shine tape and burnish it down over the sticky parts, and it leaves behind Dixie Shine. Here we are at the final reveal. This is what I've been working towards for about 3 weeks, and it was worth every minute. I absolutely love how this turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like and the subscribe button and share this channel with any other furniture flippin' lovers out there. I absolutely would love some help from you guys to grow my channel, and I promise I will get better and better at making these recordings. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope to see you next time on Diamonds from the Rough.